On April 2, 2025, Trump's tariff hammer finally fell. As the intensity and scope of the tariffs far exceeded market expectations, U.S. stocks plummeted accordingly. This was followed by Trump's approval rating hitting a new low during his second term. According to the latest Reuters poll, Trump's approval rating stands at 43%, down from 47% at the start of his term. Trump's tariff war also stirred up massive waves worldwide. The European Union is likely the main battleground besides China. While the cunning British secured only a 10% tariff hike through effective public relations, the EU as a whole faced a 20% tariff. Despite Macron's repeated hints that the real adversary lies across the Pacific, Trump's cold indifference was tantamount to a public slap in the face. On social media, the deconstruction of Trump's tariff war was even more fervent. From interpretations labeling it a declaration of war against all nations to Trump's winning strategy and the theory of the makeshift team, the tariff war is widely explained as either anti-intellectualism or merely emotional gratification. This is particularly evident among economics professionals and U.S. stock enthusiasts. For the former, this is a necessary defense of economics as a science. For the latter, the tangible financial losses are enough to fuel their rage against the perceived culprit. Trump must be cast as a heterogeneous madman. Whether satisfying both sides' increasingly polarized political sentiments through dehumanization or irrationalization is an interesting question, but it's not the focus here. The author attempts to point out that there exists a certain probability that Trump's tariff war is not purely madness, a whim, or a flight of fancy, but rather part of a plan against neoliberal globalization that Trump began contemplating years ago. We can even trace the logic of his thinking back to the platform he proposed as the Reform Party candidate in 2000. There is a possibility that, with Trump's deep transformation of the Republican Party and his return to power, he finally has the opportunity to advance the foundational ideas he laid down 25 years ago, with the tariff war being just the beginning. Whether it's madness or a grand plan, there's no doubt that the tariff war will deliver a fatal blow to the already teetering neoliberal globalized system. Trumpism, or the MAGA movement, has formally sounded the war horn against the entire edifice of neoliberal globalization. This protracted and painful war will become pivotal for determining whether this round of neoliberal globalization can be sustained. Fair and free trade. On April 2, 2025, Trump signed an executive order at the White House declaring a national economic emergency in the United States. Trump argued that the United States' persistent large annual goods trade deficits have hollowed out our manufacturing base, inhibited our ability to expand advanced domestic manufacturing capacity, undermined critical supply chains, and left our defense industrial base reliant on foreign adversaries. These persistent large annual goods trade deficits are largely due to a lack of reciprocity in our bilateral trade relationships. Divergent tariff rates and non-tariff barriers are evidence of this situation, making it harder for U.S. manufacturers to sell their products in foreign markets. This is also evidenced by the economic policies of America's major trading partners, which suppress domestic wages and consumption, thereby dampening demand for U.S. exports, while artificially enhancing the competitiveness of their products in global markets. In simpler terms, Trump believes countries around the world have taken advantage of the U.S. in trade, leading to the loss of competitiveness for American domestic manufacturing. Many scoff at Trump's claims. After all, what trade barrier could be more unjust than the Federal Reserve's periodic harvesting of the world utilizing the dollar's status as the global currency? In short, after years of harvesting the world, America suddenly playing the victim is akin to crocodile tears. If we shift perspectives, imagine you were a manufacturing worker in Ohio. Seeing U.S. capital unhesitatingly shutter American factories due to cheap foreign labor and promises from foreign governments, would you feel your job loss is fair? The author here is not trying to invoke an American version of the Rust Belt metaphor. More crucially, Trump's noisy explanation reveals an ancient political economy question: what is fair and free trade? On an abstract level, fair free trade isn't a difficult concept. It's based on the fundamental need for barter. Trading one apple for one pear is the classic simplified model. In the words of Edmund Burke, the exchange of goods is determined by the mutual convenience, and indeed by the mutual necessities of the parties. Now let's introduce more variables. If one apple for one pear is reasonable, then if apple harvests fail drastically, trading 5 pears for one apple also becomes reasonable. But if we are in an apocalyptic scenario, and you must trade your own life for an apple to alleviate your child's hunger, is an exchange based on necessity still so reasonable? As a moral philosophy professor, Adam Smith wrote his solution in The Theory of Moral Sentiments. Sympathy is essentially a projection of imagination, the understanding and empathy for another's emotional state. In common terms, it's often said that human hearts are alike, principles are shared. Smith's explanation requires further clarification. Why do we need to understand and empathize with others' emotional states, thereby producing morally altruistic behavior? Those deeply entrenched in political polarization today might understand this better. The vastly different reactions on social media to Trump being shot are the best illustration. Those who hate Trump not only feel no sympathy upon his shooting but might even lament that the shooter missed. The traditional conservative figure Edmund Burke more clearly revealed the answer to the above question: community. I need to see others as, to some extent, part of us, as non-heterogeneous, to this empathy. Without this sense of community, Smith's sympathy or empathy cannot function effectively. It is on this point that the traditional conservatism Burke established differs fundamentally from Smith's The Wealth of Nations in understanding free trade. All free trade must be subordinate to the ethical norms established by the community. In the words of Stanlis, for Burke, justice was the foundation of free trade, and social utility its consequence, contrary to Bentham's utilitarianism. In this sense, Trump's constant talk of fair trade becomes truly comprehensible. Just free trade must presuppose some form of communal consensus. For Trump and his supporters, the standard they adopt is the consensus within the American domestic community. On one hand, this means other sovereign communities view the U.S. through different consensus standards, making Trump's actions a blatant double standard. After all, on issues like technical trade barriers, the U.S., if not leading alone, shares the spotlight with the EU. On the other hand, Trump and his supporters do not see themselves as the true beneficiaries of America's global harvesting. Wall Street financial capital and scheming foreign governments are equally repugnant. As institutional victims of the global American system, they naturally believe they are qualified to define what constitutes just free trade. 2. Anti-expertise and anti-bureaucratism. Let's now move beyond these difficult, age-old questions of political economy to focus more specifically on the content of the recent tariffs. Mainstream economists have demonstrated rare unanimity in their response. They largely view Trump's tariff war as disastrous, if not catastrophic. Michael Hirsch, a columnist for Foreign Policy, stated bluntly that Trump simply does not understand economics, adding that it also suggests he is largely unfamiliar with the economic theories of the past 250 years, which have incontrovertibly shown that trade is not the zero-sum game Trump thinks it is, but benefits all. In a subsequent, more detailed analysis, Hirsch, representing a progressive liberal perspective, argued that high tariffs can be a viable trade strategy, but only if paired with targeted measures, such as those in Biden's economic bills, to be effective. He contended that Trump's blanket high tariffs not only disrupt corporate expectations but also ignore the present-day realities of the American economy. In essence, Trump is seen as turning back the clock, potentially ushering in a new era of economic depression for the United States. Hirsch's stance reflects the fundamental attitude of most economics professionals. Trump is implementing a tariff policy that fundamentally contravenes modern economic principles, and this obstinacy represents one of the latest manifestations of his anti-intellectualism. The methodology behind the Trump administration's tariff calculations on various countries became a viral story on social media. Politico satirized the perceived absurdity of the tariff plan with the headline, "Penguins, Seals, and Colonies, 5 Incredible Tariffs in Trump's Liberation Plan," highlighting the administration's apparent failure to thoroughly consider tariff issues related to overseas territory stemming from European colonialism. Through viral dissemination, the image of the Trump administration as a makeshift team became increasingly entrenched, simultaneously strengthening the association between his tariff policy and anti-intellectualism. Objectively speaking, the Trump administration's formulation of tariff rates indeed lacks sophistication, but the issue is far more complex than merely being a makeshift team. Opposition to expertise and bureaucratism are two critical perspectives that cannot be overlooked. First, Trump's strong anti-expertise inclination leads him to distrust economics as a science. The question of whether economics qualifies as a science has long been debated. This is particularly evident when different economists arrive at completely opposite conclusions when analyzing the same economic problem. This inherent ambiguity makes it difficult for economics to achieve the objectivity found in, say, the fact that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius at standard atmospheric pressure. Of course, this question extends to the broader issue of whether social sciences can be considered sciences at all. Parallel to the phenomenon where experts are sometimes derided as useless, Trump long ago lost faith in the social sciences. The collapse of the Soviet Union played a pivotal role in shaping this skepticism. Contrary to Reagan's overt optimism, most mainstream scholars at the time did not strongly believe the USSR would collapse so rapidly. Instead, they vigorously argued that the Soviet Union still possessed substantial strength to rival the United States. In Trump's words from 25 years ago, during the Cold War, newspapers and policy journals were filled with profound geopolitical thinking explaining why America could never hope to defeat the Soviet Union. Of course, their view of the most important international development of the latter half of the century was completely wrong. Worse, after the Cold War victory, these mainstream experts became engrossed in another grand narrative. Until 1991, there was plenty of fashionable theory about the end of history. The thinking was that with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the victory of capitalism, we were entering a carefree era of peace and guaranteed prosperity. These people obviously hadn't heard of Islamic fundamentalism, miniaturized weapons, terrorism, etc. Trump remarked sarcastically, "You know what they say about economists, they'll know tomorrow why the things they predicted yesterday didn't happen today." Many American foreign policy experts are no different. They write mainly for their fellow experts, and like general reporters and pundits, nobody bothers to check anybody else's record. In other words, a Trump who, 25 years ago, deemed experts incapable of predicting the Soviet collapse or foreseeing China's rise as fundamentally incompetent, upon witnessing China's rapid ascent today, would likely deepen his distrust of these very experts rather than place his faith in geniuses who misjudged America's post-Cold War trajectory twice. Second, the systemic friction between Trumpism and the established bureaucratic apparatus forces his administration to operate in a makeshift manner. As noted in previous writings, the U.S. bureaucracy does possess distinct ideological preferences. This bias means the state apparatus has not been neutralized and objectified as theory might suggest. The MAGA movement's deep state conspiracy theory is a crude imagining of these internal preferences. Adherents intuitively sense a problem within the bureaucracy but fail to grasp its substance. Consequently, they translate this intuition into easily digestible conspiracy theories for mass dissemination, namely, that a small, shadowy clique controls a hidden government. Such simplistic conspiracy theories are not unique to MAGA, both the left and right have their own conspiratorial circles. Precisely because conspiracy theories are simple can they produce easily understandable narratives that satisfy immediate political emotional needs. If one focuses solely on MAGA's conspiracy theories, a rereading of history might offer more insightful perspective. The high degree of independence within the bureaucratic system means the Trump administration often had to rely on political outsiders to enact its agenda. These outsiders are typically less skilled in the nuances of political administration than seasoned senior civil servants. Democratic media and supporters find it easier to seize upon perceived unreasonable loopholes in policies, attempting to undermine public confidence in Trump. The frequent leaking of internal Trump administration communications serves as compelling evidence. With minimal reflection, it becomes apparent where these leaks were most likely to originate. While American civil servants may not reach the fictional heights of bureaucratic mastery depicted in characters like Sir Humphrey Appleby, this does not mean they lack techniques to covertly resist political appointees. They can employ countless bureaucratic labyrinths to delay, dilute, and influence policy execution. This dynamic explains why Trump often resorted to threatening or actually abolishing entire agencies as a counter-strategy. Grasping the concepts of anti-expertise and anti-bureaucratism is crucial for rendering Trump's tariff policy comprehensible. Divorced from these two frameworks, his policies either devolve into mysterious grand strategy explanations or are reduced to merely satisfying the emotional demands of his base. Trump himself risks becoming perpetually incomprehensible, subject only to endless spectatorial imagination. 3. Declaring war on neoliberal globalization. The first two sections primarily addressed one question: why is Trump's tariff policy comprehensible? This is a necessary step to dismantle the spectatorial imagination often projected onto Trump by his progressive critics. But what people care about more deeply is why Trump launched this tariff war. The author's argument is this: Trump is declaring a full-scale war on neoliberal globalization. Let us return to the question from the first section. The fundamental difference between Burke and Smith on free trade finds an unexpected heir in Trump. Classical utilitarianism is a core tenet of neoliberal globalization, or, more precisely, the principle of utility maximization. Using utility maximization as justification, numerous U.S. corporations relocated manufacturing to regions with lower labor costs, achieving massive profit expansion. From a traditional conservative standpoint, this expansion inherently violates ethical norms. It disproportionately burdens specific domestic American groups, thereby eroding the communal consensus upon which genuine free trade depends. The costs of a collapsing consensus might not be immediately direct or visibly obvious, but the price does not vanish, it inevitably detonates within society at a future point. In Trump's own words from 25 years ago, our long-term interests require us to strike better deals with our trading partners around the world. This will cause an uproar, because we have fallen into the wrong habit of mistaking cheap sweatshop production for solid and sustainable economic stability. The core of the problem, from this perspective, is that Trump identifies neoliberal globalization as the primary force relentlessly tearing apart America's communal consensus. This is not merely an economic issue but a profoundly political one. This insight offers a potential explanation for why attempts by various nations to appease Trump through tariff reductions or barrier removals yielded minimal results, and why Trump remained deaf to accusations that he was severely damaging global supply chains. Neoliberal globalization constitutes a comprehensive, interconnected system where components are mutually adaptive. This systemic nature is also why critics from both the left and right, while adept at criticizing neoliberalism, often struggle to propose coherent alternatives. Trump's significance lies in his attempt to confront neoliberal globalization in its totality. Why impose tariffs on the entire world? Because only such a blanket approach can effectively block capital's cunning use of re-export and transshipment practices. Chinese exports of certain goods like fentanyl and automobiles to the U.S. did decline, but these declines were often offset by increased re-exports through third countries like Mexico. Under the established rules of neoliberal globalization, targeting a single nation with tariffs is often an ineffective strategy. Only universal tariff hikes can potentially suppress capital's inherent impulse and ability to flee to more favorable jurisdictions. These high tariffs represent a substantive rebellion against the growth logic central to neoliberalism. In Trump's own words from years past, American foreign policy needs to open doors for American trade, not the other way around. Here, principle and national interest speak with one voice. There are things more important than profit, and one of them is our own national security. The illusory promise of infinite growth under neoliberal globalization is built upon the infinite indulgence of human desire, resulting in a perverse inversion where people become slaves to their own wants. Willingly or not, the effects of high tariffs might painfully awaken segments of the American public from their dogmatic belief in the perpetual growth myth. Of course, tariffs constitute only a fraction of the broader plan Trump hinted at decades ago. Most surprising to many observers is the discussion around proposals such as trading the elimination of the estate tax for significantly higher capital gains taxes on the ultra-wealthy. Trump has reportedly framed this as a key step for America to regain fiscal balance. He once even acknowledged that a similar past proposal would cost me personally $700 million in the short term, but it's worth it. Advisors like Steve Bannon have long been staunch supporters of such a redistributive approach. Whether Trump can overcome immense political resistance to implement such measures remains highly uncertain, but the discussion itself is not baseless. An Axios exclusive report in late March indicated, a senior White House official told Axios the Trump administration is discussing a surprising option to help fulfill his campaign promise: allow tax rates on the wealthiest Americans to rise in exchange for cutting payroll taxes. Naturally, it remains entirely possible that Trump is simply engaging in reckless populism to pander to his base, or that even if he possesses a grand strategic vision, American society and its institutions cannot withstand the ensuing turmoil, leading to a catastrophic collapse in his support or a decisive midterm election defeat. However, before these potential outcomes materialize, if there is even a modest probability that Trump is not merely insane or erratic, then we must not underestimate the depth of his determination to confront neoliberal globalization, nor the profound destructive potential it unleashes. Furthermore, from a critical standpoint, the neoliberal version of globalization is itself a paradigm that many argue must be fundamentally transformed or ended, though the process of confronting it cannot be painless. If Trump willingly consumes his own political capital and the stability of the international order to subvert neoliberalism from within its core hegemonic stronghold, it could, from a long-term strategic perspective, potentially create opportunities or reduce future costs for other nations seeking alternative paths. For the United States in the immediate term, this approach signifies a willingness to wage a form of economic scorched earth warfare against the dense networks of neoliberal globalization. The probability and velocity of global supply chain decoupling are significantly amplified, which concurrently pressures other major economies to accelerate the strengthening of their own internal economic circulation and regional community structures. For the European Union, this scenario presents a profoundly disastrous prospect. The threat extends far beyond tariffs. It implies the United States may abdicate its traditional role as a security guarantor and external balancer in European geopolitical disputes. A EU lacking robust, autonomous military capability could quickly find itself overwhelmed by resurgent regional conflicts and great power rivalries on its doorstep. For the vast majority of other nations, they can only brace themselves to passively endure the violent ripple effects generated by Trump's frontal assault on the pillars of neoliberal globalization. Trump's high tariffs are merely the opening salvo. Regardless of their ultimate success or failure, they signal that the era of neoliberal globalization is reaching its terminus. It is highly probable that either Trumpism or mainstream economics, or perhaps both, will be stranded on the shores of history by the incoming tide. At the end of the old order, the brutal test for every nation will be a simple, stark question: how to survive.